Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review the 2015 movie Howl. Hopefully, I got that correct. If not, then ultimately I will probably have to list it on the title of what year this movie came out because there's probably another movie called Howl somewhere out there. Ultimately, you can check this movie out on Tubi, Tubi. It's an otherwise free movie and TV service. You can go ahead and check that out. Basically free. Ultimately, you can go into any time and just put in your probably Google or Facebook um, account in there and watch any number of movies for absolutely free with ads. So, going into this movie, in a very cryptic-like sense, is of course a werewolf movie. But ultimately, the werewolf characters kind of look more like orcs from the Lord of the Rings, from realistically the waist up and the waist down. They look kind of much more like quasi like werewolves at some point. So, but going into this movie, they kind of look like visually kind of interesting to just like they look just like monsters to me. So ultimately, it's like it really doesn't matter when it all comes down to it. Like they look like monsters, so good enough for me. So when going into this movie, we we have to be like this movie kind of reminded me of like the Midnight Meat Train or Train to Busan, or ultimately like it isn't a very like high end like film where it's just like where you're just seeing like a million people getting killed at one point, or you're seeing like wall to wall werewolves or like this and that. But like it's pretty interesting. It's pretty like it's kind of like it's kind of like the suspense kind of movie where eventually you're just waiting for these people to eventually at some point either survive or all get just be mincemeat. You're just kind of concerned about these characters, where their lives are going to be tied to. So, when going into this film, it's a simple concept about people ending up going on a train, but then ultimately, while the conductor is realizing that there is a problem with the train, and ultimately he has to forcibly stop the train because there's something wrong with it, ultimately he goes and tries to fix the train, and then ultimately ends up getting ghosted. He ends up getting gone. He ends up getting killed. And so for the rest of the cast has to figure out what to go on, or what had gone on, what to do next, and then ultimately they have to try to survive. So yeah, it's a quasi interesting film. At the end of the day, it's an easy way to go into something called Tubi and watch this movie easily for free. So going into this, I kind of liked that it didn't have to like aggressively give us things. Like there's kind of like lead up moments, which kind of feels again like kind of Train to Busan, where Train to Busan just feels like at first just kind of like a normal train day, and then all of a sudden, a girl is looking out the window, and then all of a sudden a zombie is eating somebody alive. It's like, whoa, okay. Good thing that I saw in the background that somebody's getting eaten and nobbled up. All right, cool. So, if anything, this is like an interesting film. You can start to invest in some of the characters and hope that that some people make it out of here, and ultimately you're hoping like certain people who this entire time have to like help everyone out will make it out alive, especially the nice people that are end up trying to do the right thing, ultimately hoping they're going to get out of this alive. So going into this movie might not be for everybody, but at the end of the day, I just kind of liked it. It was just kind of weird. It was just kind of interesting. And so that's all I really want to say about it in a very cryptic like sense, because ultimately a lot of people might go into this and like, man, this movie was, I didn't really care. Or ultimately it's just like, yeah, you can kind of feel like this movie was kind of like one of those like cheap films that like didn't want to show their monsters the entire time. So, but it kind of builds up suspense towards me, like monster or monsters, or however you want to go into this, because ultimately, like, I want to cryptically talk about this now, because there might be one monster or there might be a billion monsters. There could be a billion. No, because ultimately that would be a gigantic special effects budget, and I don't think that that would go into. Maybe there's just a absurd amount of whatever. But anyways, going into this, reasonably, you can ultimately kind of wag your finger at some stuff, some logic of this movie that when looking at it, it's just like, dude, there's no way that they would have this stuff in this train, or there would be no way that, like, people wouldn't have been able to figure out how to, like, do this train, or, like, hey, come on, there's no way that this would actually, like, work out this way, or like, come on, like, this doesn't make any, like, there's some times you can probably pop some holes through things, but at the end of the day, it's just a movie to just enjoy. So at the end of the day, let's go into the spoiler variation of this movie so we can kind of quickly kind of chomp through a lot of this stuff in a monster-esque form and go into the spoiler variation of this. So, like I said, ultimately, I might not go into character name like details. I think a lot of the times within this movie, there's nobody that's really like repetitiously saying anybody's name to where it can connect with me. Or ultimately, like, I think the only real there's only really one character that I think does the most out of everybody, and like, I don't, like, I think that you should know via what description that I make him as who that person is. uh Ultimately, I think his name is Billy in this movie, but I'm going into it. Let's go into this. So, spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Yeah. So, Howl. Ultimately, I don't know, I just like, I was kind of in a mood for a movie where people were stuck in a train and had to fend for themselves. Kind of interesting. So, and I'm probably building up this movie to be way better than it actually is, and then a lot of people will come in here like, yeah, I hated this movie, blah, I didn't like it, blah, and then I'm sorry if you don't like this movie, I'm sorry. So, spoiler time. So we ultimately have a guy that had just gotten off a shift, and ultimately he is exhausted, and so ultimately he's heading home to ultimately be told by his superior that he's like, hey, somebody didn't show up, so you got to show up for this shift. And ultimately the guy's like, you know what, like, I'm exhausted, like, I just want to go home. And the guy's like looking at him, he's like, so he's like, you know what, fine, I will do the shift, I'll do it, believe me, I'll do it, I'll go ahead, I'll do it, and then just be done with it. So ultimately, this guy is the ticket taker for this train. So ultimately, we have a guy that is ultimately on this train. Everything is seemingly going well, and ultimately he is on the microphone. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to come to get your tickets. Please present your tickets so ultimately I can tick them, because that's what I do with my life. All right, so I'm gonna be here for this ticket. Make sure it's out. It's like, yeah, it's like, get your freaking tickets out, buddies. So, of course, and this is the thing I hate. Here's the thing. I have, on a numerous job before, have had to get receipts from people, because people would come to my part of a store and need to pick up an item. And ultimately, for me to understand where this item is, I would need to see their receipt. So ultimately, I would say, "Hey, can I get your receipt?" And of course, they're like, "Yeah, I don't know where it is. I don't know where my receipt is." And I'm like, really? This is the one thing that you need to get this item, and you don't have it. Or otherwise, there's a lot of people that the screen that they would come into would automatically voice actively tell them they need to get their receipt out to be able to scan this machine to ultimately get their information to pop up. And so, reasonably, these people should already have the receipt presento, because ultimately, a lot of times, they will just be buying the item in the store, and 5 minutes later, they should still have this receipt handy. And by golly, surefire enough, they wouldn't have it. It's a whole thing. So, going into this, we have this guy who's telling them getting their ticket out. So ultimately, he's going to every single one of these schmucks and ultimately asking, um, like, "Hey, ticket, ticket, ticket." And so we have this girl that is ultimately getting food out for everybody, slinging out all her food. And evidently, she's in a crappy mood. And so she kind of takes it out on the ticket guy. Like, "Hey, maybe you should do your job better," or whatever. It's like what? Because ultimately, when the train ultimately has to stop, and and the ticket guy is like, "Hey, do you know what's kind of going on with the train?" And she's like, "Well, hey, maybe if you did your job, then maybe we'd all know. Maybe I wouldn't have to know what's going on with the train or something like that." So some garbagey crap like that. So we have it to where the guy's asking for tickets for people. Eventually, he goes to this one girl, and he's like, "Ticket?" And she's like, "You know what? I think it's somewhere. I think it's somewhere on my body. I think it's somewhere. I think it's in my luggage. I think it's in my butt. I think it's somewhere." And so this guy's like, "Well, if you don't have your ticket on you, I'm gonna make you pay for for this entire train's trip, even if that's not exactly where your stop is. You're gonna pay for this whole entire train ride." And she's just like, "Well, I guess that's what I'm gonna have to do then." And he's like, "Yeah, that's what you're gonna have to do." So ultimately, she pays for the entire route, and he gives her car back to her, and he moves on. Moves on to a girl that, of course, the entire time, coincidentally, that this guy's asking for the ticket, this girl is on her phone, and she's like talking to somebody. "Yeah, I'm having a great day. It's just a great, wonderful time." I'm like, "Yeah, of course, because you have these people that do this as well." So this guy's like, "Excuse me, ticket." He's rapid firely like, "Excuse me, ticket. Excuse me, miss, ticket." So eventually it gets to the point to where the girl finally relents and gives him the ticket. And then eventually, while he's looking at the ticket, just looking at it, she's like, "Oh my god, this train guy is looking at my chest." And he's like, "Really?" He's like, "Here's your freaking ticket. I'm just gonna." He's looking at the other passengers, and they're just like, "Dude, she's a piece of work. Like, hey man, like we're gonna like imagine nothing what she said even happens." Just by looking at them, that's what you can assume that they're saying with their eyes. Like, "Hey man, she's a piece of garbage. You do your thing." So this guy goes through all these tickets, and ultimately there's some people that are easily just having their ticket out and giving it to them, and everything seems to be seemingly copacetic. So eventually, they are stopped for a very long time. And so they're like, what is going on? So eventually the ticket guy ends up just going into the room of the conductor, the guy that's like, hey, where is he at? He, the ticket guy is looking all over for the conductor and couldn't find him. It's like he bizarrely ran off. So, because ultimately, again, through spoilers, we had the conductor who ultimately has a train malfunction, and so he goes out of the train to figure out what it is, and then he disappears. So we have to where the ticket guy is just like, okay, the conductor is missing. The conductor is gone. What am I gonna tell? What am I gonna do? So ultimately, the other girl that is giving out food, she's like, well, it seems like people are starting to get restless. Like, what should we tell them? It's like, well, how about you just kind of give them food and just kind of like just tell them that it'll be a little bit longer. So the guys eventually like stalling for time, but eventually they have to like cement like, excuse me, passengers, but like reasonably it seems like the conductor is missing, and so we are like, it gets to the point to where ultimately one of the passengers is like, well, hey, do you want me to just get out and like push? Do you want me to get out and push the train? Like hey, like come on, like we're waiting for the what is going on with this train? Like come on. And so eventually they cannot find this train conductor. They can't get the train to move. So ultimately, like the ticket guy just has to like talk to the people and say, hey, like, you know what? In all brutal honesty, the the next the next train station honestly isn't very far from here. So how about we all get out and we just walk our way to the excuse me, all the way to the next station. And so ultimately that's what they all get out and that's what they all start to do. But then reasonably all of a sudden they start to see this big animal-esque like figure appearing into the darkness. So they're all just like, you know what? How about we go back into the train? So they all start running all back into the train to where it seems like one girl trips and falls and has her leg outside of the train, in between them trying to close the doors back up and her trying to get out of her leg being outside of the doors. And so what ends up happening is the animal ends up coming nearby the door. And so they're trying to pull this girl's leg out, and reasonably what ends up happening is the animal grabs this girl's leg, and like they're in this like tug of war like battle. They're trying to close these doors, and ultimately the werewolf is trying to get this leg and like bouncing this woman up and down through these doors. But eventually the werewolf gives up on this girl, and so you just see a big huge gash of this girl's leg. And so they finally are just like, okay, well, we got the girl. Like, what the heck was that? And so everybody is starting to assess that it could be a bear, but ultimately the ticket guy is saying, like, you know what? I don't think it's I don't think it's a bear. It looks more like a werewolf. So immediately they're just like, well, hey, we're stuck here. This is an animal. Like, what is going on? Uh, how about we just start reinforcing the train, because ultimately there is some animal that is around. already attacking seemingly one person, quite possibly two, because we don't know what happened with his conductor. And so immediately we have one guy that comes to uh, we have like the ticket guy that is ultimately trying to figure out if they have any kind of weapons on the train, and they ultimately have axes, which makes no sense. I'm like, dude, this is like weapons, and you have them on a train? This doesn't seem right. But anyways, so they're popping out all these axes, and then ultimately one guy is coming to the ticket guy and mentioning it's like, well, hey, like, I don't think we're all going to get out of this. It's survival of the fittest. It's like, how about me and you kind of like, we'll stick together, and then everybody else will just have to be just sacrifice for us to survive, and this and that. Like, he's already like, this guy is looking at everybody like, I'm sure that guy is going to be a good hot dog for that werewolf, or I'm sure this guy is going to be a good steak dinner for so and so, and this and that. So we eventually, while ultimately they're fortifying this train up, ultimately the ticket guy is counting everybody that's there, and he's like, whatever happened to that sports guy that ultimately, like, what happened to him? So we find out that the sports guy is just taking a dump down by the toilet. And so what is with this toilet is this bathroom within this train is that you basically have door, toilet, and window. So the ticket guy ends up knocking on the door of the bathroom saying, hey, excuse me, like, we need you to get out of the bathroom here, like, soon, because we need, like, we need you to come out here so you can be safe. And so reasonably the guy's like, oh, come on, I'm popping a squat. And so ultimately it gets to the point where the werewolf is getting close to the window. And because ultimately, like, the guy could, like, start to know that eventually he's going to come for him. The ticket guy is going to know that he's going to go after the sports guy because he's in the toilet taking a dump. So the werewolf is ultimately breaking through this glass, and the sports guy cannot get this door unlocked. And the ticket guy is trying to figure out how to get this door unlocked. They're fiddling with this door, and nobody can get it unlocked, to the point to where eventually the werewolf just comes through the glass and tears this guy alive, just like claws him up and kills him. So eventually the ticket guy is scrambling to he ultimately knows that guy is mincemeat, so ultimately he's trying to just protect himself. So he's running to where there's double doors, to where ultimately he can be protected. And so he's trying to get the doors back open, and the people aren't going to open the door. And so you just have this werewolf coming out of this bathroom like, hey man, I just took a big I took a big dump, and I'm going to say hello. So this werewolf comes really dang close to this man and is almost going to be like, hey, you're going to be my dinner. And so we have one guy forcibly opening up this door, fleeing out to this werewolf with an axe, just crazily chopping at the bit with this werewolf. And so immediately, like, we're thinking that this werewolf is dead, but then eventually the werewolf gets a little bit like, and then so the guy comes and chomps at him again and again and again, and like, I think it's dead now. I think you took it. I think you got it. I think you did it. So eventually we find out that the woman that had gotten a nibble of leg is all of a sudden getting very, very sick. And she is starting to Ralph out her own teeth. And everybody's like, you know what? I don't know what's wrong with her, but, like, you know what? Like, I've never seen somebody splue out their own teeth before. This seems wrong. So everybody is starting to slowly but surely come to the consensus that this woman is probably turning into one of them. So reasonably, we have the survival of the fittest guy that is ultimately just like, hey, like, I think we need to get rid of this woman because, like, she is going to turn and she's going to kill us all. So, like, if anything, we need to get rid of this woman. And so it gets to the point to where ultimately people are just like, no, we need to keep everybody that we can. We need to try to survive, like numbers, like the numbers. So ultimately, we have the girl that had delivered food to everybody. She is eventually talking to this survival of the fittest guy and ultimately mentioning that she had done a job interview with him, and she remembers that he was only looking at her for one thing and wasn't looking for her to be hired. He was looking for her to go into a bedroom and have some bedroom business. Where ultimately she declined, and ultimately he doesn't remember her, but she does, and ultimately he's like, oh yeah, like I think I do remember you, like you were that hussy that was like whatever. So it eventually just gets to the point to where like ultimately this guy is like the worst out of everybody. So they just decide to, because he's getting on everybody's nerves, they decide to just tie this guy up and like force him to sit right next to the girl that is seemingly at some point going to turn. And so reasonably, we are slowly but surely assuming that there is only one werewolf. So they start, like, a few people, like mostly the ticket guy, try to figure out how to get this train working again. And so ultimately they can get out of there. And so some people start to get out of the train, and ultimately we figure out that the ticket guy knows how to work the train because ultimately he was going to get promoted to working the train because ultimately that's the reason why he took this extra shift, was to butter up to his boss because he was going to get a promotion fairly soon. So we we ultimately have it to where two guys are going underneath the train, or one guy is going underneath the train to try to fix the train. And ultimately, he notices there's a leak underneath the train and tries to get tape to fix it. While the other guy is supposed to just be the flashlight guy that holds the flashlight for this guy to see what's going on. While the flashlight guy is just holding the flashlight, he's all of a sudden starting to hear some girl like yell out. So this guy eventually just starts walking into the forest and eventually starts to see this girl hanging upside down in this tree, being chewed up away by some werewolf, and so eventually he dies as well. So they're figuring out how to fix the train. It gets to the point where the guy plugs the leak, but then eventually two werewolves appear. So ultimately, the ticket guy goes back into the train, all while they're figuring out that the other woman is starting to turn and be a werewolf. So reasonably, what ends up happening is the guy that was tied gets untied, and so eventually what happens is they're having to, with like fire extinguishers and all kinds of weapons, they're attacking. They're desperately having to attack this woman, but every time uh, anybody is trying to attack this old lady, the man that was with her is attacking them. So it's like, dude, she's turned. You can obviously see it, but ultimately he's just like, no, that's my wife. So basically, it gets to the point to where they like. It gets to the point to where ultimately the werewolf ends up grabbing the girl that was bringing up all the food to people. And basically, the survival of the fittest guy is like, well, it's either you or me. And he pushes her off the train as the train is slowly but surely starting to roll. And so the train is slowly but surely starting to roll. And this girl is like, oh no, like, please don't eat me. And so eventually she gets get. She gets got. But I'm assuming within the train, the problem with this is that the thing that was hit was probably the gas line. So ultimately, this train went somewhere, but it didn't go really far. So eventually, it stops again. So ultimately, we just have it to where it's like, well, that's it for the train. And so immediately, people are just like, well, like, we just gotta continue to defend ourselves till the next day. Into this train they go. So ultimately, there's this one woman and survival of the fittest guy, and like there's very few people left. We have the guy that was underneath the train that is also he's gonna come back at some point. So because he was hiding underneath the train while the werewolves were just casually just going about their old stroll. So he's like, "Whew, man, I'm not going to move from here. Hope for the best." So we have it to where we are really starting to see these werewolves get more and more desperate. So ultimately, what they do is they start just bashing through a lot of these doors to where ultimately we have to where the survival of the fittest guy is ultimately just like, you know what, like, I'm only going to give a about me. And so ultimately, at first, the survival of the fittest guy and the two people that are left are kind of like fighting it out. They're kind of at odds. It gets to the point to where the one girl slices this guy's throat. And so ultimately he's like, dude, well, we're not friends, so I'm gonna get out of here. So what he does is one of the werewolves or two of the werewolves start making it through this one door. And so ultimately what he does is he takes an item and puts it between the two people and him to where ultimately he's going to escape out of this train, but they are going to be stuck here in between two werewolves and just a crap sandwich. So we ultimately have the bigger werewolf that is ultimately coming from the other side of the train. And so we eventually have it to where the guy that was underneath the train comes back with some like Molotov like cocktail, and he's wielding it at these werewolves, and the two werewolves run away. And so ultimately, like, he tells these two people to make a run for it, and like he'll try to distract he'll distract these things for them. So ultimately what ends up happening is he ends up getting killed in the process. So we have it to where it's basically just the ticket guy and the girl left. And so ultimately, because survival of the fittest guy is still running all the way to town and trying to make his way back. So the ticket guy, again, howling is coming on. So ultimately, he's just like, well, you know what? I'm gonna give this girl a head start. So, like, girl that I don't know the name of, or whoever she is, because she wasn't that important in this movie to do much of anything. He tells her, "Hey, um, like, go, keep running. I'm gonna slow these things down." And so ultimately, she tries to run, but she's like the crappiest runner. So she tries to run, but then she's like, I'm too tired. So she's like, she's like half running. And so reasonably, we have the ticket guy that is ultimately just like, he's hearing the howling coming. He's like, you know what? Like, just bring it. Just whatever it's gonna be, just bring it on. So we have the big werewolf that comes to just go like, hey, like, you me again. So because ultimately, I guess that was the male werewolf, and this is the female werewolf because you could quasi tell. So this werewolf takes this guy, and I think just starts beating the living crap out of him, and then I think gets a little nibble off of him. I think at some points. So we're just seeing this girl just running, and so eventually we have survival the fittest guy is making his way back, running his way downtown, walking fast and chases past, and he's homebound. So ultimately, we have it to where survival of the fittest guy is just casually walking, just kind of making his way, and he ultimately finds a ticket guy, and he's like, "Hey, buddy, hey, yeah, like, what's going on?" And so ticket guy turns, and ticket guy is the werewolf, and so this guy is effed. So ultimately, this guy's tired, and so ultimately he's going to be mincemeat to the werewolves. So what happens next is we end up seeing this random Esh-like girl making it all the way back to uh, the train station, and she has like some thing in her hand. I don't remember what it is, but she has some like thing in her hand. And so ultimately she is just like, you know what? Like, I think I won. Maybe. And that's just how the movie ends. I'm like, so basically everyone dies but this one random girl that I don't know her importance in this film, because you have a lot of people that were either freaking like sabotaged by other people on the train, or you very much got people that were just sacrificing themselves for other people to live, and they ended up either turning into a werewolf or dying in the end of all of this. So that was like, well, I guess that's kind of a good thing, but ultimately, I wish there was more people on this train. I wish more people would have got gobbledygooked up. Like, I really wish that this would have been like a Train to Busan like moment where ultimately there's so many people on this train, and you have like entire sections of people just getting mincemeated by werewolves and this and that, to where like you're just like, man, like that whole scene went down crazily. Um, it would be interesting to see where what would happen with this movie if this movie had a much bigger budget or like bigger kind of approach to it, and ultimately had like Train to Busan level like craziness going on with this and could be doing anything. Like, it would be interesting to see where this movie would end up being if it had that kind of budget. But anyways, that's all I'm going to say about this movie because I don't want to take too much time, so I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.